the marital rape exception gets to live another day in India after the Delhi High Court delivered a split verdict on the question of whether or not this exception in the Indian Penal Code is unconstitutional. Now, Section 375 of the Indian Penal Code of the IPC defines the offence of rape. It includes certain exceptions. Exception number 2 is that any sexual acts or sexual intercourse by a man with his wife shall not be rape. Now, this had been challenged in the Delhi High Court. It was argued that this provision violates numerous fundamental rights, including the right to equal treatment and the right to life and personal liberty. It was being heard by a division bench of the Delhi High Court. That means 2 judges. And the judges in question here were Justices Rajiv Shakdher and Justice C. Harishankar. Now, these 2 judges have arrived at opposing points of view, differing points of view on this question of law. Justice Rajiv Shakdher has found that there is a violation of the fundamental rights. This exception is unconstitutional and therefore it needs to be struck down. Justice Harishankar, on the other hand, has held that there are no grounds for the court to hold that there is a violation of the fundamental rights here. It should not be interfering with this and instead should leave it to the legislature, i.e. Parliament, to decide whether or not to get rid of this exception. Now, because there is a split decision here, that within a 2-judge bench, there are 2 different points of view here. The marital rape exception will continue to remain in force despite what Justice Shakdher has said. And the next step to decide what the actual final position of the court is will require a 3rd judge to weigh in. Now, the process for this is that the Chief Justice of the High Court, in this case, Justice Vipin Sanghi is the acting Chief Justice of the Delhi High Court, will on the administrative side assign this case to a 3rd judge who look through everything which was argued here and then take a call. Depending on what they say, there will be a majority view and a minority view of the court, and we'll then know what the Delhi High Court's position is. Once that's done, this can also then be appealed in the Supreme Court, which can then arrive at a final conclusion on whether or not the marital rape exception is constitutional. Now, there is another possibility that the Supreme Court could take up this matter sooner if it is transferred to them, in particular if it gets tagged with certain other matters dealing with the marital rape exception at the Supreme Court, including matters from Gujarat and Karnataka. Now, this of course just tells us where we're going to go and what happens next, but what was this case about, right? So this case was originally filed in 2015. A petition was filed by the NGO RIT Foundation. It's an NGO which works on social justice and women's empowerment. They filed this petition. They were joined then by the All India Democratic Women's Association. There were survivors of marital rape also filed petitions before the Delhi High Court, and all of these were then heard together. And their primary argument was that there is a violation of Article 14 of the Constitution here, which is the right to equal treatment, because what you're seeing is that married women are being treated differently from other women, that even where there's a situation where they've been forced into an act of sex, they cannot go and file a case of rape with the police, which another woman would be able to do just because there is a relationship, a marriage between them and this man. Essentially, are you saying that the question of that the institution of marriage means that a woman no longer has a right to consent or not consent to sexual intercourse? And this therefore also raised questions of Article 21, the right to personal liberty, because a woman's autonomy was at play here. Now, there were interventions by certain men's rights groups and groups which claimed that they were here to fight family rights in India, where they said that there is a great scope for misuse if this happens. If the exception were to be removed, you could have a lot of abuse of this provision, because how would you really show consent or a lack of consent in a marital home? The Delhi government said that there were adequate safeguards for adequate remedies for women in the event they were facing this kind of abuse from their husband. They could file a case for cruelty under Section 498A of the IPC. They could approach the courts for protection under the Domestic Violence Act. The central government did not take a view and instead held that they are conducting a review of criminal law and they will look at this as part of that. Despite many attempts to get them to take a stance, they refused to do so. The court appointed 2 independent experts, senior advocates Rajshekhar Rao and Rebecca John, to assist them in this matter as amici curiae. They were asked to look at the issues of constitutional law and criminal law which were present here and assist the court in making a decision. Both of them found that this provision is unconstitutional, that it violates the fundamental rights, in particular Article 14, in particular Article 21 as well, and therefore they recommended that it should be struck down by the courts. Now, the judgment of Justice Shakdher has found that there is a violation of Article 14. Justice Hari Shankar, on the other hand, found that there is, that if we go by the traditional test, for instance, for Article 14, there is an intelligible differential here because you're looking at women who are married versus women who are unmarried. The institution of marriage is a ground for differential treatment, and therefore what the legislature has done does not need to be interfered with. Now, the matter will, of course, as we said, now proceed to a third judge. You can follow what all the developments, whether it goes at the Delhi High Court or at the Supreme Court with the Quint. One interesting thing to note is we were the first people to point out that there was a potential split verdict here back on 13th January itself. We said that this was a possibility. So stay tuned to the Quint for all updates on this matter.